Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Matt here. In this video, I wanted to give my opinion on the MDT ACC Elite chassis. This probably needs no introduction because it's a very popular chassis from MDT. You see a lot of these things on the firing lines for good reason. It's a great product and great chassis, but I thought it was a really good candidate for this video series because I definitely didn't want to do a in-depth technical review on it. I just wanted to give my opinions because I think MDT themselves actually has like a 20-minute video going through every single feature of this chassis in great detail, whereas I just wanted to talk about my opinions and experiences using this chassis. So I used the ACC Elite for more than a full season. I ran it for 2024 and a bit before that as well. So I have a lot of use on this thing, both rimfire and centerfire competition. And as usual, I wanted to talk about how I acquired these because I know it's important to know for a lot of people when it comes to sponsored shooters. So this MDT ACC Elite in my hands is actually the very same one that came with me to Italy when I shot the 2023 IPRF Rimfire World Championship. For those of you who follow the channel, you'll probably notice right away that it looks a bit different because this was recently Cerakoted in solid burnt bronze, which I think looks pretty nice. And it had a different Cerakote job when I went to Italy, but that's the reason why it looks a little bit different. Now, MDT is a really big supporter of the industry as a whole, as well as the shooting community, and they gave a fairly generous discount to the Canadian team that was going to Italy for that World Championship match. So that's when I picked up this chassis here. Again, if you follow the channel, you'll also know that I had a second ACC Elite, the one that's done up in a black, bronze, and gold sort of camo Cerakote job. That one I acquired in 2024 as an MDT supported shooter. So that's how I acquired my two ACC Elites. At the time of filming, I am not an MDT supported shooter. And again, I'm mentioning all this because I know it's important when people give their opinions about products and such. But that's how I got the ACC Elites. And you'll see here that this is not set up how I was running it for competitions. Because for 2025, I'm moving away from MDT chassis, not because I don't like them, but this is going to a buddy of mine. So I did remove all the accessories and the weights and everything. And this is how he's going to receive it. There's still a few accessories on this chassis that you wouldn't normally get if you were to just buy the chassis itself. The first things are the control bridges here. I have 3 on the chassis. It doesn't come with any of those. And also the rubber dampeners for the buttstock is also an additional accessory, but I'm keeping these in here and I'm gonna send it off to my buddy that way. So I feel like the best way to do this is just to go start at the front, work my way towards the back and just talk about things that I liked, what I don't like, and how certain things worked for me, basically. Actually, let me take a step back. Overall, the ACC Elite is a phenomenal chassis and a really good upgrade from the original ACC iteration, which I'm just going to call the Gen 1, in almost every conceivable way. I think MDT put a lot of thought into how to improve the original ACC design, and the ACC Elite knocks a lot of the features out of the park. They did a good job overall. It's a solid chassis, and I never felt like it held me back in competition in any way, really. It's a great chassis. So anyway, starting from the front, the first very important improvement over the Gen 1 is they made the forend a lot more rigid. So I have a Gen 1 ACC that I competed with for quite some time, and a common complaint or issue with the Gen 1 ACC was the forend was a little bit too thin in terms of the material thickness, so you could induce some flex, and it also had a little bit of a twang or tuning fork effect when you pulled a shot off. Now, a lot of those issues were minimized when you ran weights in the internal forend, but it was still a slight issue. I'll be totally honest, when I was competing with the Gen 1 ACC, those were not issues that I personally were aware of, but I think that's due to the fact that I was completely new. My first ever competition rifle setup was on the ACC Gen 1, and I just, again, wasn't really in tune to what a competition rifle could feel like and all that stuff. But after having a lot more years of experiences and running all these different chassis and stuff, I can definitely say the more rigid forend on the ACC Elite as well as the new Gen 2 is a huge improvement, and all those issues are basically fixed. What I also really appreciate about the ACC Elite is MDT made it sort of backwards compatible with the internal weight system. So if you have internal weights for an ACC Gen 1 and you pick up the Elite, you can still use the same internal weights, which again, it's a really nice touch that they kept the system the same. It can take up to 5 external weights on each side as well as 5 internals. So I really do think the ACC still is one of the most modular weight systems for a competition chassis. And because it has one of the longest forends that I'm aware of for a competition chassis, it allows you to mount weights really easily, quite far away from the center of gravity. It gives people a much easier way to balance out certain rifle setups, and a lot of people appreciate that. So generally, a really good weight system in the ACC Elite, and as you would expect, there's also a full ARCA rail integrated into the bottom of the forend, which is sort of like a standard feature, something that you would expect out of any decent competition chassis these days. The ARCA rail also has these little dimples machined into it, and those are for the Really Right Stuff R-Lock clamp system. But I really want to know how important of a feature this is, because truth be told, I've never actually noticed anyone running the R-Lock clamp system in competition. Now, I guess this would be fairly hard to notice because it's literally just a little button on the side of the clamp, but I truly can't remember a time I noticed anyone actually using the R-Lock clamp. So let me know if that's an important feature to you. I guess it doesn't really affect anything. If you don't use it, it doesn't affect anything. So it's nice that it's ready in the ARCA rail if you do use it. As mentioned before, the control bridges here were an additional accessory. The forend can hold 3 of them max. So I purchased 3 of them here. And to be honest, they didn't actually add any level of control because I personally don't put my support side hand on top of the control bridges. I prefer a control item mounted onto the side of my chassis personally. But I got them mostly for aesthetics, which probably doesn't surprise some people. I think it just finishes off the overall design and look of the ACC really nicely. And an additional benefit of them is they act as a pretty good Mirage Shield. If you're doing really long strings of fire on a hot day, again, works pretty well as a Mirage Shield. Now they're each held on with 6 screws, which is a lot. They probably didn't need 6 each. I think 4 would have been fine. And I will also say, so they each have 6 screws, and if you have 3 of them, that's 18 screws plus 2 action screws. So you're having to remove 20 screws if you want to take your barreled action out, which is a little bit excessive. If you swap chassis or barreled actions a lot and you want to run the control bridges, it can be a lot of screws you have to deal with. Now, you don't have to use 6 to hold these in, but I just thought it looked kind of weird if you only install 4 of the 6 screws personally. I also did want to mention they have another version of these forend covers, which is a night vision bridge. It has an integrated pick rail, and this is for mounting certain types of optics, either night vision, thermals, or a Tarak of some sort. And I picked one up because I have a Tarak Micro that mounts onto a night vision bridge, and this worked really nicely for that. It does mount in the same way with 6 screws, and it does have the same footprint, which means you can mix and match if you want the pick rail version or the control bridge version as well. They also have 4 locating pins on the bottom of here to help to prevent this thing moving under recoil. And again, it worked really well with the Tarak Micro. All right, going on to the middle section of this chassis, they did extend this Barricade Stop a little bit more from what the Gen 1 was, and I actually wish they had made it even longer. I think they could have done that. The big reason for that is those of us running rimfire setups in an ACC Elite, your magazine is still going to come out from the Barricade Stop a little bit. And for those REM 700 rimfires, it's absolutely critical that your magazine stays in place for proper feeding and function. So if you're pushing into a barricade bag and your bag contacts your magazine and shifts the position of it, it can induce some reliability issues. So if you watch my match footage when I'm running an ACC Elite for rimfire, you'll actually see that I'm running an additional accessory from Grey Ops. It mounts to the ARCA rail here, and it does sort of like an L shape and provides a longer plate to protect the magazine from the barricade bag. And I would personally highly recommend that for any rimfire setup in an ACC Elite, because again, it's just critical for good function. For centerfire, totally not needed. I was running the ACC Elite for centerfire as well, and you don't need to be as careful about that just because you're playing around with different tolerances, more forgiving tolerances, if you will. The magazine release on the MDT ACC is something I also really like. You can see there is a screw on the front face of that. That is just to lock down the adjustment, but the actual adjustment screw is from the bottom of the mag release, which means you can actually now adjust the magazine height with the magazine seated in the rifle, which I think is just a nice touch. I think they put a lot of thought into this mag release design and it works pretty well. However, one thing I didn't like about the ACC Elite was this sort of spacer system they introduced into the Magwell. So if you have a slightly undersized magazine like the Voodoo polymer mags, or if you just have excessive play, either side to side or front and back, MDT cut these channels into the Magwell, 2 on each side, as well as 2 on the front. And what these little channels are for is this little plastic dowel. So I don't know if these are nylon or Delrin, but basically just a little plastic dowel that you can insert into these channels, sort of like such. So they just act as a spacer system. And again, I wasn't really a huge fan of this system, to be honest, for a few different reasons. First off, it's not really adjustable. It's just, you know, you put the pins in, and if they work, they work. If not, you're still out of luck. And because the pins have like a sharp edge to them, when they're installed in these little, in the channels, sometimes inserting a mag would actually get hung up on the sharp edge of that. So people were fouling them down, creating a little bit of a feed ramp and whatnot. I just think the system in general, honestly, was a little bit unrefined and it almost seemed like an afterthought. I think another reason why I was a little bit disappointed in the system is because if you look at the prototype versions of the ACC Elite, I want to say this was 2021 SHOT Show, maybe 2022, but they had a prototype ACC Elite before it was released. And they actually had a plate system in the front of the Magwell that could move back and forth to sort of eliminate play in the Magwell. And I thought that was a really neat design, really reminiscent to what KRG ended up implementing in the C4. And I'm curious as to why they decided to ditch that feature. I have a feeling it was to maybe keep the manufacturing costs down and be able to offer the chassis at a better price point, because the C4 is a very expensive chassis. But I personally wish they had kept that. I know some people were saying that that adjustment feature was quite thick, so it pushed the Barricade Stop outwards and changed the, I guess, balance point of the chassis. But if they had somehow made it a little bit thinner with some good adjustment in there, I personally would have loved to see that. Anyway, going on to the grip here, same adjustment as what you had on the previous ACC grip. You can see there's 2 slots here, so this entire grip can move back and forth as well as change the angle a bit. I have mine in a fairly neutral position because generally I'm not actually very picky in my hand placement. As long as I can get a nice repeatable trigger pull, I'm pretty happy with that. So I just left this in a very sort of neutral position. However, what I am a little bit more picky about is my thumb position on my trigger hand. They have an M-lock slot here with an M-lock thumb rest, and you can slide this back and forth and angle it however you want and really fine tune the position of your thumb on your trigger hand. So I thought that was really nice, and it's overall a good design from MDT. There's also one on the other side if you want to run one for your support side hand, but if you watch my match footage, you might have noticed that I was actually running a timer attached to this M-lock slot, and when I was in the start position, my thumb could wrap around. I would start the timer when the stage began, and it was just a really nice little system there. So that's how I was running it. All right, going on to the buttstock, huge fan of these new adjustment screws. They're basically a clamp inside with teeth that clamp onto these serrated posts. And they also come with a little C-clip there. So when you go to reinstall the cheek piece or the buttstock that uses the same post and clamp system, it'll remember the setting so you don't have to play around with your buttstock adjustment. So you can see there, it just falls onto the C-clip and you can screw down the button so it locks down that clamp. Overall, it worked well. Never had these shift on me in competition. All right, lastly, I did want to touch on the Buttstock Jellies. I actually get questions about these fairly often, and I think it's because they're not cheap. They're not super expensive, but they're definitely not inexpensive, and the marketing behind them would make you think there's some crazy voodoo magic going on that's going to buy you points. So let me give my honest opinion about the Buttstock Jellies. First off, I think it makes the buttstock look better, and you know I'm a sucker for aesthetics. I'm not a huge fan of the heavily skeletonized buttstock, so again, just looks better right off the bat. And in terms of if they actually change the recoil profile or feeling of the chassis, I would say they do. They act as sort of like the limb savers on a bow. They just take away the vibrations or the harsh buzz you might get when cracking a shot off. However, can I say these are going to improve your score at a match? No, I cannot. In fact, I would probably say these would not improve your score at a match, because I don't think this affects the recoil so much where you would be, for example, able to get back on target faster to spot your hits or misses and stuff like that. I personally don't think it does that. It might make your chassis feel better and take some of the buzz out of it, but really, if you want to save the money there, just know that you're probably not losing any points doing that. So anyway, that's my opinion on the Buttstock Jellies. But the best way to figure out if it's something you want to pick up is try an ACC Elite with and without the jellies. There's a lot of these on the line, so maybe you can ask your friends to try one out. Find an ACC with no Buttstock Jellies, you know, blast a few rounds from that, and then find a similar caliber with an ACC with jellies, blast a few rounds and see if you notice a difference. But anyway, overall, the ACC Elite is a great chassis. The few things that I wasn't a huge fan of, honestly, at the end of the day are really small. You know, it's a small part of the entire picture. And I think, again, this is a huge upgrade to the Gen 1. I believe MDT is phasing out the Gen 1 ACC, but if you're still considering a Gen 1 or an ACC Elite, I would say the ACC Elite is definitely worth every penny over the Gen 1. And if you're even looking at the Gen 2 versus the ACC Elite, I'll put it this way. If you want the top of the line chassis that's specifically designed for competition, the ACC Elite is what you want to get, because it's built from the ground up to do exactly that. Anyway, hopefully that was a little breakdown that you found interesting on this chassis. As usual, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer. But if not, I will see you guys in the next video. Take care. Cheers.